intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
Is Trudeau quitting? Did he quit? Did he resign? What the heck did Trudeau do exactly?
What a great time for this to be happening, Patrick. Trump is going to take office shortly. He's got all these plans on tariffs. What a great time for us to be disorganized and start falling apart. Where do you think this goes? Now that Trudeau's quit, what happens next with the Liberals? Who's going to be the next Liberal leader in your opinion?
Certainly the focus isn't on what's going on economically, let's face it. And that, to me, is problematic for sure.
So, Patrick, yesterday was a very fascinating day for me. You know why? Because as Trudeau was resigning, or whatever he was doing, we'll talk about that in a second, I was getting nonstop messages from people that watched this show that were like, oh my God, you and Patrick are just going to have so much fun with this topic. So people were like, you got to give Patrick his red meat. And I said, oh, he's going to have his red meat. Don't you worry. So here we go. Patrick, what is going on? Trudeau resigned, or did he? Do we have a government? What's happening right now, buddy?
Well, you make a really good point in the last question you asked. Do we have a government? And, for all intent and purpose, we don't. I mean, not a government that's making decisions and driving things forward. And as a matter of fact, the good news around it is that a lot of the bills that they had proposed, which one of them being, capital gains tax, which is just a whole other story, a lot of these bills get shut down because they're not completed. So that's kind of some good news, because some of those bills were controversial. I didn't agree with them. So I'm happy about that part of it. But having said all of that, we literally don't have a government right now. Let's be really clear. By now, everybody will know that ultimately Trudeau resigned from his position as the leader of the Liberal Party. Now, that means that they have to now go into this whole process of choosing a new leader. And, they've suspended everything in between time. And so we're not going to know much until really the end of March. And in the meantime, we don't really have a government per se. We have people in place, but, big decisions aren't being made. Certainly the focus isn't on what's going on economically, let's face it. And that, to me, is problematic for sure.
What a great time for this to be happening, Patrick. Right when Trump's going to get into power here shortly. Trump is going to take office shortly. He's got all these plans on tariffs. What a great time for us to be disorganized and start falling apart. Not like it wasn't falling apart before, but I'm just like, the timing literally couldn't be worse.
And it's hard not to focus on the downside of stuff. But I mean, let's face it, really, when we look at what's going on in Canada right now, it feels like such a cluster screw. I mean, you've got no government. We've got the U.S. coming in, who's made very, very clear the tariffs that they want to put in place. Will Trump have some compassion? I doubt it. He's a savvy business guy. So he's going to go for the jugular. He may have some patience and want to create relationship in advance with Poilievre, who will ultimately become our prime minister. So I think he may be a little bit compassionate and have some empathy for what's going on in Canada right now. But let's face it, we are going into negotiations with the U.S. without a team that has any savvy, any brains. And how well are they going to represent Canada? They're just not. So I think everything's going to get stalled. It's a real mess, which is just, the good news is that Trudeau will be gone. There'll be a change of government. That's the good news. The pain is far from over, and we're going to go through a lot more pain between now and then ultimately when we finally do get a new leader in this country. And I'm not looking forward to the next few months, because there's going to be some things that really piss us off, guaranteed.
It's going to be made for some interesting Reining In episodes. I know that already. I'm so excited for it, Patrick. That's the good news. By the way, you talked about it's hard not to focus on the downside. The good side is that it gives us a lot to talk about, and it gets you particularly fired up. So that's a good thing for this show.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens when all the dust settles. In the meantime, again, we're going to go through some real difficult times. I think that we have to actually mentally prepare ourselves for that. Remember to breathe. This too shall pass. But again, as we go through the challenges that we face economically, we can talk about unemployment. We're going to talk about population. We're going to talk about housing. There's a lot of things that are still, the world still goes on, and Canada lacks government, lacks leadership. Not a great time for Canada.
Now, listen, Patrick, this whole episode we're going to frame as Fearless Forecast, which is as we talk about every segment of this show, the economy, the population. And right now we're talking about kind of, the government. Let's have a Fearless Forecast here from you, a Patrick prediction, as I like to call them. Where do you think this goes? Now that Trudeau's quit, what happens next with the Liberals? Who's going to be the next Liberal leader in your opinion? Give us your fearless forecast. And when are we going to have an election?
I don't know about who will be the next Liberal leader. I mean, there's certainly
Carbon
a lot.
tax Carney. Carbon tax
Yeah, well,
Carney.
that's the thing, right? Carbon tax, Carney, whatever and I mean, there's even some conversation about Freeland. To be honest with you, I don't really care. They're
Do you
gone.
think?
They're
Do you
out.
think? Do you think Freeland for sure though? I mean, didn't they already run that bus over her?
No, 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 no. But she did, she took the high road. She resigned, which is, takes her up, actually positions her as being, I don't know, smart. But anyways, I don't even want to talk about who the Liberal leader is going to be. I don't care. I don't think it really matters for the next probably 8 years. And so ultimately, let them do what they're going to do. I don't want to even, I don't care.
What?
How's that? I don't care.
Gosh, Patrick, there's a lot of things I was expecting you to say. That's not one of them. But let's talk about one more thing before we move on past this topic. Have you watched the Jordan Peterson interview with Pierre Poilievre? Have you watched it? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I watched a lot of it. I didn't watch all of it, but I did watch a lot of it. I mean, it's like
What'd you think?
45 million views, 45 million views. Well, I think it's good. I think any of the long format stuff, some people are arguing that it's, two white guys having this whole conservative conversation, and, they're far right and they're this and they're that. I think it's, for somebody who actually sits down and listens to these long format interviews, you can pick some real insights out of those conversations of who Poilievre really is, what those policies are going to look. Many say that he got too many softballs. I don't know what they wanted Jordan to do. Maybe they wanted Jordan Peterson to grill him or something. I don't know. I don't think that was the intention of that conversation. But I think Poilievre, from my perspective, what I did watch of it, I thought there was some really great snapshots in there of the direction that he wants to go, who he is as a leader, and some of the policies that he's going to put in place. And and let's make no mistake about it, he's not the second coming. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a politician. My concern about Poilievre, he's a career politician. He doesn't have business savvy per se, but at the end of the day, there is some concerns around that. And he's still a politician. He's going to make decisions that a lot of people aren't going to like, me included. I still have I'll still have the right as a voter to complain, which I will probably. But I think ultimately, when we look into the future, we've got something that we can clean up around this country in terms of how far left we've swung and a lot of the policies that are driving our economy. I think there's some forecast that I want to put in there, and that is unemployment is going to spike. And one of the areas it's going to spike, government jobs. So I think that is something that people have to prepare themselves for. The layers of bureaucracy within our government, we've talked about it a lot, JG. And so as much as we talked about the construction industry starting to slow down, given the slowdown in housing, we would be remiss not to point out the fact that when Poilievre comes in, he's going to start cleaning house. He's going to start taking responsibility for actually what he has talked about, which is cleaning up the bureaucracy that has slowed things down, increased cost, gets in the way of productivity, and he's going to get very focused on the country being productive again, which I think is a good thing, but that's going to come with some real discomfort for some individuals.
Patrick, I haven't watched the whole interview either quite yet. I've watched most of it, probably 2/3 of it, but I sent a particular clip, the part where they talk about real estate. I sent that to someone that I do business with. And it's interesting as this person doesn't necessarily have like full-blown conservative views as I would necessarily. They're much more kind of, they would probably call themselves centrists, but they definitely lean a lot more left than I do. Point is that they called me like right away. They watched the clip. They called me, 20 minutes later, and they said, JG, is the stuff he's saying, and this is interesting. This is someone I invest with, Patrick. This is someone that I work with on a regular basis. And they said this to me, and I was kind of blown away. But it occurred to me, oh yeah, they're getting the bulk of their information from like mainstream news, so they don't say. But and they said, JG, is it true that stuff he's talking about, how like the consultants cost so much money and like the bureaucracy takes so much? Like, is it true that a huge chunk of what real estate costs is actually a bunch of bureaucracy around real estate? Is that true? And I said, okay. I said, it's funny that you actually question that because you're an investor with me. And I said, you personally have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars through Visture on these projects we do together for this exact same thing. And he said, I had no idea. And I thought to myself, isn't that crazy? You got an investor here who's in the trenches. in a sense, and still didn't really understand. I'm thinking, holy, no wonder the average person doesn't understand stuff. You and I, maybe, Patrick, because we're in it like this deep, but my God, it's just interesting. And this opened their eyes. And I just thought to myself, well, hopefully more people's eyes start opening, because there's a huge part of real estate, which we're going to talk about for the rest of the show, that is wrapped up in this bureaucracy. And that is what chokes everything down.
Well, like so many things, we normalize it. We operate in it, and we have to normalize it in order to actually exist within it. I mean, there's only so much we can do. We push back, we talk about it, we try and vote about it. But in between time and in the meantime, we have to normalize it. Think about gas prices. I'll just use that as an example. Imagine we here in the lower mainland, I'm driving by a service station, a gas station the other day, and I think gas was $1.62. And I go, oh, wow, gas has come down. So it's like we normalize $1.80 a liter for gas. Like that should be the way it is. And ultimately, over the past 2 or 3 years, that's what's gotten normal. What's gotten normal within our housing and real estate industry is the cost of bureaucracy, the cost of development charges, the length of time, which is about opportunity costs, as well as the cost of getting permits, and the delays and the things and the hoops that we have to jump through all have been normalized. We have normalized our tax base and how we pay taxes on real estate and within the context of building and developing. I mean, it's just asinine what we have normalized. And so to your point, your client friend that you had that conversation with, they've just normalized it. Like they don't know anything different. And because maybe they're not entrepreneurial in spirit or run a business, you and I are always looking at efficiencies and ways to improve operations and to bring costs down. And the last thing that you and I as business owners want is to create bureaucracy within our own businesses. So bureaucracy is a button for you. It's a huge button for me. It's probably bigger than even Trudeau, the whole concept of bureaucracy and the layers that go with it. So there's costs associated with it, and we normalize it. So that's my kind of rant around that.
So if you like these episodes and you want to learn more about what's going on with real estate in Canada, investing in real estate, and understanding how to invest in real estate the right way, head on down to the descriptions below, follow those links.